Good morning. Today, let's continue our discussion of the chapter Discovering Tut, the saga continues. In the last class, we discussed about the legend of Tutankhamun, the great pharaoh of Egypt, also known as King Tut. And we read about the famous archaeologist Howard Carter who discovered King Tut's tomb in 1922, and how King Tut became very popular after that, and about the curse of the pharaoh and the famous mask of King Tut. So today let's continue our discussion from where we stopped in the last class. We were reading about the preparations being made for a forensic reconstruction of Tut's mummy that was discovered by Howard Carter in 1922. And this chapter begins with the description of the preparations being made for a CT scan of Tut's mummy on 5th January 2005. In the first two paragraphs, we read that the weather was not favorable at the time the tomb was being opened after 80 years. So, the rumors about the curse of the pharaoh also gained momentum, and many tourists were also present there to witness the event, and they had come from different parts of the world. Now we are going to read from the third paragraph of page 23 of Hornbill, and we will read about what Carter found when he opened Tut's tomb way back in 1922. And in this paragraph and the next three paragraphs, the writer is talking about the very expensive and unusual treasures that were found in Tut's tomb. And the rich treasures in Tut's tomb is one main reason for his huge popularity now. So the question is, when they buried the king or pharaohs of Egypt, why did they keep all these expensive things in the tomb? The answer is that the Egyptians believed in afterlife, and they thought that the brilliance of gold would generate resurrection. Resurrection means coming back to life. And because of this belief that the person would continue to live after death, they also buried many everyday things he'd want in afterlife. And that is what is described in the third paragraph on page 23. They remain the richest royal collection ever found and have become part of the pharaoh's legend. Stunning artifacts in gold, their eternal brilliance meant to guarantee resurrection, caused a sensation at the time of the discovery and still get the most attention. But Tut was also buried with everyday things he'd want in the afterlife: board games, a bronze razor, linen undergarments, cases of food and wine. All these things were kept in the tomb because they thought that the pharaohs were not dead and they would be still living in the tomb. And that is the belief in afterlife. In the next paragraph, we read about all the adornments in the tomb. That is all the decoration done with flowers. And it is said here that by looking at the flowers, they could say that the burial was in March or April, because the flowers were seasonal. Those were flowers that bloomed only in March or April. And finally, after removing all the extra stuff from the tomb, when Carter reached the bottom of the gold coffin, the coffin was made of gold, he realized that the mummy could not be taken out because the ritual resin with which the mummy was covered had hardened. It had become so hard that it was stuck to the bottom of the coffin. So Howard Carter came up with the idea of placing the tomb in blazing sunshine. And that's what we read in the first paragraph of page 25, because we know very well that Egypt is a desert and it will be extremely hot there. So Carter thought that the resins would melt if the tomb was kept under the sun. But it did not happen, as he expected. So Carter had to cut the mummy to pieces to take it out of the coffin. And he justifies what he did, because he says that if he hadn't taken out the king's remains at that time, the thieves would have ripped it apart to remove the gold. Now we are on page 25, second paragraph. Here the writer is again giving a list of the various expensive things that they found in the coffin and the tomb, which is all made of gold. So let's read and find out. We're on the fourth line. In Tut's time, the royals were fabulously wealthy, and they thought or hoped they could take their riches with them. For his journey to the great beyond, King Tut was lavished with glittering goods, precious collars, inlaid necklaces and bracelets, rings, amulets, a ceremonial apron, sandals, sheaths for his fingers and toes, and now the iconic inner coffin and mask, all of pure gold. Now, in that same paragraph, the writer is giving us a clear picture of how Carter's men, that is, Howard Carter's team of workers, removed the mummy's head and cut the mummy at every major joint to take it out, and then they reassembled it on a layer of sand. So this was the study conducted by Howard Carter in 1922. In the next paragraph, our writer is telling us about another anatomy professor who did more research on Tut's tomb by using more advanced scientific techniques. And this study was conducted in 1968, 40 years after Carter's discovery. And by this time, the scientists and researchers were more interested in understanding the fascinating details of Tut's life and the intriguing mysteries of death. And that is what is written here. Because people were not interested in knowing about the treasures anymore, because all those details they had got. Now they wanted to know about the details of Tut's life, how he lived, and what was the cause of his death. And they could use more sophisticated tools like X-ray, and the researchers found that Tut's breastbone and front ribs were missing. And this was the result of the study conducted by the anatomy professor. But still, they hadn't found answers to questions like how did Tut die and how old was he at the time of his death. And this is what we read in the second last paragraph on page 25. King Tut's demise was a big event, even by royal standards. He was the last of his family's line, and his funeral was the death rattle of a dynasty. But the particulars of his passing away and its aftermath are unclear. Understand that people now want to know more about King Tut's life in Egypt. So there is very little information available, and it is given in the next two paragraphs. The writer is giving some information about Tut's ancestors. A very powerful pharaoh named Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten. Akhenaten's original name was Amenhotep IV, but after he promoted the worship of the sun disk Aten, he changed his name to Akhenaten. And he also shifted the religious capital from Thebes to Amarna. And another shocking thing done by Akhenaten was to attack the major god Amun, smashing his images and closing his temples. Then there is also a mention of a mysterious Smenkhare who ruled for a brief period after Akhenaten's death. And it was after Smenkhare's exit that young Tutankhamun took the throne. And he did a remarkable thing by immediately restoring the worship of Amun. And he also changed his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, meaning the living image of Amun. and it is believed that King Tut reigned for about 9 years and then died unexpectedly. So all these details you can find in the first 2 paragraphs on page 26. Now in the following paragraphs we are going to read about the latest studies on the Egyptian mummies done in this century. So we get to know more about the Egyptian mummy project, which started in 2003. And in the third paragraph on page 26, it is mentioned that King Tut's mummy was the first to be scanned by a CT scanner. With this scanning machine donated by Siemens, its manufacturer, and National Geographic Society. After the scanning of Tut's mummy, a team of radiology, forensic and anatomy experts examined the results to understand the mysteries and secrets about the Egyptian burial process. And this is what we read in the second last paragraph of page 26. With Tut's entire body similarly recorded, a team of specialists in radiology, forensics and anatomy began to probe the secrets that the winged goddesses of a gilded burial shrine protected for so long. So this is the Egyptian belief that all their secrets are protected by some gods or goddesses. Now here are the details of the scanning process that took place in 2003. That's what we're going to read in the next 2 paragraphs. And we also read some interesting facts about what happened at that time to remind the workers of the Pharaoh's curse. So I hope you have not forgotten about the Pharaoh's curse that was mentioned in the beginning of this chapter also. So let's see what happened on that night when the remains of King Tut was being taken out of the tomb for the scanning. What happened is that the scanner stopped functioning as the sand had entered a cooler fan because of the strong wind in the desert. Then 2 workers had to get 2 extra fans from the office to solve this problem. And after that the scanning was done. Then the experts checked the data and confirmed that there was no loss of data because of the malfunctioning of the scanner. So the data was intact. And the workers carried Tut's mummy back to the tomb. And this is what we read on page 27, first paragraph. Less than 3 hours after he was removed from his coffin, the Pharaoh again rested in peace where the funerary priests had laid him so long ago. Now we are done with our discussion on King Tut and his life, the rich treasures in his tomb and all the fascinating facts about him, and the belief of Egyptians in gods and goddesses and the Pharaoh's curse. So on the whole, it's a very interesting chapter, and the writer concludes this article by saying that the wind stopped as soon as the scanning procedure was over. And he also makes a special mention of the star Orion, the constellation Orion, which the Egyptians believe is the god of afterlife. I hope you have all got a good idea about Egyptian culture, the traditions, rituals and funerary practices, and all that is discussed in this chapter, and the fascination for King Tut and about his tomb. So let's stop here for today. Do write down the answers to the comprehension questions given in the text, and that's your assignment. So until we meet again, have a nice day.